Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So since it's December, we have already started our champion year-end ranking series. Just as a reminder, if you're new to the channel, I do these twice a year, typically in July and December, or June and December. But December's here. We already did 2020 buffed champions rankings. There were only 10 buffs to rank this time around, so it wasn't too great of a burden. However, now we need to tackle some more difficult decisions, difficult ranking videos, and we're going to be ranking 2022 champions. Now, since I do like to go into a bit of detail to explain my reasoning why I place each champion where, these videos typically are a bit longer, and that's why they are split up in two, because I will have to discuss 22 champions in these videos. As a full disclaimer, I will not be including Jessica Jones in this ranking video. Number one, because nobody still has her and she is not out, and number two, also because she's going to be unique exclusive champion. And Mantis is not included in these ranking videos either, because she's brand new. I still haven't had a chance to really kind of like play around with her, and even if I did, it definitely would not be enough time to kind of like form a full judgment on it. Speaking on that, there are several champions that are more recent, where the rankings, I would openly say, will likely change in the space of next half a year, once the champions that are currently not available in the featured 6-star champion come out in the next 6-star featured, and once majority of the player base does have access to them, it typically gives us much better insight in these champions, and we kind of can form more precise opinions. So some of the newer champion placements you might actively or heavily disagree with here, and that is fine, because I can openly say that their placements on these lists are definitely subject to change in my next ranking videos series in half a year, when I will be revisiting 2022 champions and kind of like looking in the hindsight. All that being said, it is important that you guys keep in mind that this is basically a mixture of my personal views, personal opinions, things that I value in the game, as well as the in-game popularity, in-game trends, and things of that nature. I do not work for Kabam. I do not have access to any widespread data of how popular each champion is, how effective they are, so on and so forth. So it is perfectly fine if you value champions differently, because we might care about different things in the game. We might look at things differently. We might experience the game differently based on where you are in the story progression, based on the game modes that you focus on, based on the masteries that you run, and based on the playstyle that you prefer. So you should not agree to every single champion placement that I'm about to make, because we each have different valuations to it, and that is perfectly fine. I want you to disagree. I want you to come to the comment section, debate and argue why you would place certain champion higher, why you would place them lower. But ultimately also remember that somebody has to be on top, somebody has to be on bottom, and just because a champion is ranked lower here on my list than it would be on yours, it doesn't mean that I don't necessarily value those champions. In fact, discussing 2022 champions, it is quite obvious that it has been a good year of champions. Vast majority of the champions are very hard to rank in 2022, because I believe they are well balanced. We do not have a Psycho Man this year. We do not have a Super Scroll or Purgatory this year, where everybody looks at that champion as an absolute dud. In fact, there is one champion that I placed clearly at the bottom as I started making this list, and then everything else was quite a big struggle for me to think over, ponder, and rank them. There is one champion who I think is noticeably weaker than rest, but even with that, I don't think that champion, who I will name the worst champion of 2022, is a bad champion. I don't think so. I think that champion is, let's say, average, maybe slightly above average, but that again serves as a testament that we have had a quality years of champions added to the game. So let's start. Let's get to it. Let's bring up Aunt May's screen. Again, as I said, no Jessica Jones, no Mantis in this ranking video. If I were to rank Mantis on my initial impressions, I'd probably put her somewhere towards the middle. I do expect quite good things from her, But again, that would be doing her a disservice. Right. So which one is the champion that is not like the others? Which champion out of these 22 remaining, I think, is objectively the weaker one? And again, keep in mind, I think that every single champion in 2022 has their uses, has a purpose, has something that they do. But champion that, in my opinion, goes to the bottom is Captain Britain. And I am saying that as somebody who has a rank 3 Captain Britain. Fact of the matter is, every new champion, I think, that has come out this year, I think I have taken to rank 3, or almost all of them, that are at the very least in featured 6-star hero crystals. And Captain Britain does suffer from a problem, where she thrives in matchups where opponent purifies her debuffs. But she doesn't directly punish that, unlike several other champions that already exist in the game. The best example here would be some of the recommended matchups for Captain Britain would include champs like, I don't know, Agent Venom or Mallman or Kingpin and things like that. But we have Bishop, who nukes all of that stuff immediately, much quicker. And most importantly, he's much more easy to use, because if his stun gets shrugged off, opponent gets passively stunned. Captain Britain doesn't have that type of stuff. Only thing that she does in these matchups where she, in theory, is designed to shine, is she ramps up quicker. And that is it. And that is where kind of the problem here lies. Where if a champion is designed for a specific set of fights, unlike many of these other champions who can do these same specific fights and more, Captain Britain is still being relatively mediocre. Like, yeah, you can take a Korg with her, you can take Kingpin, stuff like that, but virtually in all of those matchups, you'd probably prefer, you know, Bishop, OG Storm, somebody else. And that's when you know this champion is lacking. I do think that also the fact that she is a ramp-up champion, which in definition, ramp-up champions are immediately being much more limited in how many game modes they're going to be, you know, current, actual, and going to get to shine in, or at the very least will be very impressive in. I don't think that ramp-up champions, for instance, are never going to be good for Alliance War or Battlegrounds and things like that. But that ramp-up has to be quick, it has to be seamless, and that champion has to have plenty of other, you know, plenty of good reasons to be, you know, given those catalysts, given that attention. So the fact that she is a ramp-up champion does not help her case too much. Her ramp-up is, you know, something that you do have to manage. There are many cool things in her kit, but unfortunately, most of those cool things just don't quite come together well enough. I am saying all of this about Captain Britain whilst having a rank 4 Captain Britain showcase waiting to be uploaded for you guys, where, you know, that video is gonna prove me partially wrong in a sense. Because if you do commit to Captain Britain, you can get good results out of her. And hence, again, the emphasis on the idea that all of the champions in 2022 have their use, have their purpose. At the moment, realistically, the only thing Captain Britain shines at and is legitimately great at is as a stalling defensive champion in specific set of nodes and metas. And that is because of her having access to these exhaustion debuffs whenever opponent crits against her, and basically being able to stall out these fights. And that is kind of primarily for Battlegrounds. Again, I have a rank 3 Captain Britain. I have tried her out in AQ, because in theory, she should fit the AQ lanes that I'm doing, like Path 7 in Section 1, where she has access to 3 debuffs, including slow, so she can deal with the unstoppable that the champions are getting there. She has access to prowess, so she can reduce the duration of the unstoppable. But she just doesn't come together well enough to a point where I much rather use just more efficient champions that don't have access to slow, and I have to kind of like wait out that unstoppable, but that's easier than using Captain Britain. And similarly as well, she has access to 3 buffs, so I can use her for buffed up lanes, but within the fight mechanics, it's not always easy to maintain those buffs up, and ultimately, it just seemed a bit more of a hassle than it should be for an efficient champion to function. So as it stands right now, I do think there are things that you can do with Captain Britain, but aside from, specific Battlegrounds metas, I personally would not put my seal of approval or recommendation of giving catalysts to Captain Britain over, majority of the other mutant champions. And let's move on to 21. And 21 placement, some people might call unfair, and it is a bit, because it's Shuri. And Shuri is one of the newer champions in the game. And there is quite a lot of unique things in her kit. Again, none of the champions this year are unredeemably bad. That's not what I'm saying at all. However, what I am saying is that as it stands right now, I have yet to see anything from her that would give her any higher position, considering with the champions that she competes. Yes, it is obvious that she is going to be one of those defended champions that people need to get used to, but virtually any champion that has even a smidge of defensive capability initially seems hard, and then we get used to it, like we did with Korgs, like we did with Iron Man, Infinity Wars, and so forth. Ultimately, do I see her being a really big problem defender half a year from now? Not really. Maybe on specific nodes or specific metas. Okay, and then do I see her being like a mainstay tech attacker in different game modes? Not really. I do think that we might see her now and then somewhere in, let's say, a W attack, similar to how for a while we seem to see Silver Centurion, but he has fallen off the map. So I think where there is a will, there is a way, and if you do have a lot of will to use Shuri, you will have your opportunity. But because of how ramp-uppy she is, because of her very abysmal start in damage department, and the fact that 90+% of the fights that people do are relatively short to mid-length, then Kabam devs definitely didn't do any favors to Shuri when it comes to her kit being, so heavily ramp-up reliant, where it can ramp up to a very great damage output, but it does take a while. And I just don't think that her utility bits are going to be enough to kind of offset it. There are many things that I do like about Shuri, but she's one of those champions where I'm fully open to the idea that she might be better than I currently rate her. And also, it's important to note that she's still subject to balancing, so she has potential to, get buffed up. But the way she is right now, I am not necessarily seeing a clear path for her to be a popular or well-recognized or frequently ranked champion in the game. That's where I'm going to leave that. Time will tell, and there is definitely, a lot that could happen with her kit, because she does have unique bits of utilities, like she's a tech champion. If you need be, she can avoid critting, or she can access to guaranteed crits, tons of shocks, tons of passive shocks, passive armor ups, that miss mechanic on heavy attack, all non-contact projectiles. There are plenty of things in there, but she might have 1 billion abilities. If she's going to be too slow, people are just not going to use it. So with her, it's kind of like TBD situation. The next champion is in a bit similar case as Shuri, except that we have had more time. So in spot number 20, I'm putting in Sam Wilson here. And that kind of pains me a bit, because I really do like the character. And I do think that Sam can be really good and is better than majority of the community looks at him. Now, he does need to be high sig, in my opinion, in order to acquire mediocre damage output, which is kind of a problem in his availability, because if you do want to use this champion, you kind of have to take that leap of faith and give him a ton of sig stones. Because unawakened or low sig, I just don't think his damage is good enough for virtually any, comparison, really. There is a ton of utilities. Some of the problems with Sam Wilson, in my personal experience, have come from the fact that it is a bit timing or RNG reliant, or to put it more specifically, in tricky matchups, in hard fights where there is some additional timer watching involved and things like that, it is not easy to play Captain America Sam Wilson. And that is just another thing that typically deters people from using champion. In theory, he has amazing potential. The fact that he doesn't crit, the fact that he has access to instant raptures, bypass miss, the fact that he has power control, the fact that he has that bulwark that lets him bypass all the defensive offensive abilities when he's blocking with the bulwark. All of that is kind of slightly, in my opinion, ruined by the fact that you do need to make sure that you have active armor ups. You do need to keep a very close eye on that bulwark buff, and you need to keep it refreshed. It doesn't have the longest rotation, so it does require upkeep. And you combine all of that with a playstyle that typically requires you kind of rushing and being fairly aggressive. It is not the easiest thing to pull off. I do think a dedicated player who knows this champion inside out can achieve good things. At the same time, I think the entry requirements and the skill requirements of being good with this champion might be slightly too high for what this champion offers. Therefore, majority of the people just decide not to really bother. Now, additionally, I do think he's tankier and better on defense than many people realize as well. He's one of those champions that can sneak up on you. And if I see somebody with a rank 4 Captain America Sam Wilson, typically like in Battlegrounds, I do end up banning it, because I know that those people know this champion very well and can definitely grab you by surprise. There are plenty of things to like about Captain America Sam Wilson. I definitely did have much bigger hopes for him looking at his kit. But ultimately, I just think that it hasn't come together all that well for him. I think that he's one of those could be much, much better than he is with a few minor tweaks type of champions. I still think he's great, but nobody will be able to convince me that he's currently popular, or he's currently kind of like mainstay champion that is being, used by top tier players to combat everything and stuff like that. Because that's not true. Right. Moving on, we need to grab a move on. We have spot number 19 is Wong. And Wong I have discussed at length plenty of times in my videos, and Wong is starting to see a bit more love from the players, and that has largely often to do with the fact that he can be very troublesome defender for specific Alliance war nodes, and so therefore quite a few people have ended up taking Wong to rank 3 or even rank 4. Because, again, in Alliance War situations, he can be very, very, very problematic, or without a great counter for him. At the same time, unfortunately, it hasn't necessarily translated too well in Battlegrounds, and he is not seeing much use there. And when it comes to casual questing, he is even worse off than he is in Alliance War and Battlegrounds. The problem with Wong is that he does have quite a long ramp up of where you basically need to throw up to like 8 level 1s to fully rank up the guy, but that is really only feasible in like Eternity of Pain fights perhaps, or Labyrinth or Abyss or something like that, which is not a relevant content in today's game. Because of the nature of his ramp up, a lot of people discount him prematurely without realizing that you do not necessarily need to ramp him to the max to great results. Wong is in fact a great champion for short to medium fights under some specific conditions, and those conditions are if opponent deals energy damage to you, or ideally puts medium strength, let's say energy debuff on you, or if opponent gains buffs frequently. Then having Wong awaken, entering the fight with the correct pre-fight, can make Wong actually a fast champion for Battlegrounds offense and things like that. The problem is that also kind of describes majority of the Mystic champions, and majority of the Mystic champions that might be easier to operate and more effective and quicker. Wong's unfortunately a character where he just doesn't really have a home. He doesn't really have an offensive purpose that he would, shine above the others. As a defender, again, with specific node combinations in Alliance War, he can shine. I'm sure that there will be Battlegrounds metas where, as a defender, he will end up being, very popular and good. But offensively, he has limited uses at the moment at best. And even though he has the capability, once he's fully ramped up, of crazy damage, crazy healing, I do feel that they could have given him some more utility and quicker ramp up, and it would be a much different story. Wong is a champion I absolutely love and enjoy using. It's just normally if I use Wong, it's because I want to, not because I should. He's almost never the best option for something in this game. Moving on to spot number 18. Spot number 18 is going to be the pterodactyl bird, and that's Sauron. Now, Sauron, I think initially I was even underestimating him, and the fact is that Sauron has come together relatively well. He is, in one sense, somewhat underwhelming, and many of his abilities feel like too reserved, too toned down. He doesn't have the greatest damage. His degens and bleeds don't do the most damage, and things like that. At the same time, he is a very formidable defender that does require familiarity with this champion in order to be able to counter him confidently, because he does have a level 1 that plenty of people do seem to struggle evading. He does go periodically unblockable when he dashes at you, which catches people off guard. In specific setups, he does have a crazy good regeneration, which can work. So as a defender, he functions well. The problem for Sauron as a defender is the fact that Warlock, Nimrod, and Omega Sentinel exist. So in Alliance War, it's not the most effective unless you can absolutely make sure that those 3 champions can't touch this guy anywhere. He's going to get nuked absolutely. That's problem with large portions of Mutant class, where these 3 tech champions just eradicate the defensive potential in content where you have the option to choose them. But at the same time, he's still dangerous, and obviously if opponents do not have great counters, let's say for Battlegrounds, he can be a very, very, very good defender that we see at the highest levels of the Battlegrounds play used in specific matters. Now, offensively, I do think that he is too slow for Battlegrounds in majority cases, let's say, and I do think that he doesn't offer quite enough for majority of the setups in Alliance War that we have had that far. At the same time, one thing that definitely did surprise me was Sauron's capability in other content. How well Sauron took some of the Eternity of Pain fights with his 95% reduced damage from bleed, with his access to prowess effect sometimes being extremely relevant, with his poison immunity, with his immunity to regeneration rates, reduction or increase, and access to an unblockable. So there are things that Sauron can do, and he's one of those champions that's not gonna be super shiny. He's kind of like a workhorse donkey offensively, really. He is understated. I do think that Kabam did a disservice to him in the damage department, but with his immunities together with his unblockable and access to prowess, he is just what the situation calls for, enough times for him to have an offensive value in the game as well. So, to recap, let's say about average attacker in majority of the cases, but does fulfill some very important specific requirements, and defensively can be an absolute monster if you can protect him from the big evil mean robots. Moving on, and this is going to be another kind of giving the champion benefit of a doubt placement. If I didn't want to give Misty as much benefit of a doubt, then looking at Attuma, speaking with CCP content creators as well in private, Attuma does seem to have more potential in my opinion, because his ramp up, unlike Shuri's, is quicker. We'll see if it is quick enough in the damage department, because again, if a champion does not have a baseline damage, that immediately significantly limits their uses no matter what their utility kit is. At the same time, he's extremely unique. He will be a great or perfect counter for a ton of nodes, because Kabam loves to screw with our ability accuracy quite frequently, and he can bypass all of that. He can bypass Penny's auto blocks, which basically nobody else bypasses, and things like that. So there is a ton of potential here. This is me giving this champion a benefit of a doubt. He does have fairly straightforward rotation. He does have plenty of defensive potential as well. The only couple of things that I would have liked to see more from this champion as a defensive champion is perhaps longer reach heavy attack that's harder to get away from, and level 1 that's slightly trickier. But given the fact that he will have the ability to reflect damage back if you're not careful managing his water stacks, he will go unstoppable as well for long periods of time. If you let him throw his level 1s, he will have true accuracy, basically eliminating all the weight effects. So I do think that there is quite a lot in his kit that will in fact function well on defense and offense. There's a lot that remains to be seen from this character. I have been messing around with my rank 5 5-star, and I do believe that he will find his place in the game, which also could potentially include, you know, either Alliance, Quest Alliance, or offense, defense, or battlegrounds even potentially, which are the most important areas of the game for majority of the case, because if those champions can function well enough in those 3 game modes, they are almost always guaranteed to function well enough in the rest of the story content and stuff like that. So I do think Attuma is worth keeping an eye on. Again, I might be wrong. You might disagree with me giving this champion as high of a benefit of doubt, but I do expect quite decently good things out of this character, so that is why he lives here right now. Moving on to spot number 16. Spot number 16 is a champion that is still, in my opinion, extremely underrated in the contest. Ironically, a champion with arguably the shittiest awakened ability that I have seen in really, really long time. It is really underpowered awakened ability. It sucks. It really does. I don't know who or why designed it and thought it's a good idea, but it sucks. Because these benefits in their base are mediocre at best. They are worse than, let's say, She-Hulk's, who is a champion that got her rehash in like 2017 or 18. That was like 4 years ago. And she only has maximum of 40% uptime of those benefits. So, yeah, no, it's not great. Awakened. On the bright side, it means that there's no point in trying to get her awakened, or virtually no point. The cool thing about Misty, and the thing that a lot of people still sleep on, is the fact that she can spend the entire fight unblockable with guaranteed crits, and that in itself houses a ton of value. The only real downside of Misty Knight, in my opinion, is the fact that she doesn't have any way to increase her crit damage or base attack. Therefore, in vast majority of the cases, her damage output is not the greatest, even if you do keep your guaranteed crits at all times. And that is kind of the problem here as well, because her advertised rotation was like level 2 and level 1, which would force you to sacrifice that 100% uptime of the unblockable, which is her main kit of utility, offensively speaking. So her level 2s and level 1s, in majority of the situations, you don't even want to touch, which, again, does reduce your damage output, not by that much, because that's even not that effective, and definitely eliminates your most important offensive utility. Having permanent unblockable is extremely powerful ability in this game, and as proven, you can utilize it against a ton of annoying auto-block champions, or in many fights where it's hard to find openings, and she definitely has more offensive potential than majority of the people would give her credit to, because a lot of people turn their back because even though there are guaranteed crits, she doesn't have the most explosive and crazy damage output, which in my opinion is a huge mistake that people are making. Additionally, she can be an annoying defender as well, with the fact that the further the fight goes, typically the more likely she can evade or shrug off a parry stun or go unblockable randomly. So all of those things are to be taken in consideration. Yes, she's not the tankiest champion, but she's a champion that can definitely catch people off guard quite easily. And yes, the kind of shame here is that without synergies especially, you cannot utilize her level 2 and level 1, which is her main source of kind of like burst damage, and keep uptime of your unblockable. If she could do that, she would be even higher on this list, and she definitely would be even more valuable as a champion. But even as is, that permanent unblockable is a very notable ability. And especially also in like story content or any other content that can modify her attack, or maybe in any Battlegrounds meta where you can modify her attack, she can be an absolute monster and a savage. But even without that, she can do, Thing, for instance, well in Battlegrounds. She can do Penny Parker well enough. She's not going to be the fastest ever option, but she is going to be a very reliable and safe option for those fights. So I do think a lot of people are sleeping on Misty Knight. Moving on to spot number 15. Spot number 15 is going to be Toad. And with that, we are also finishing the mutants. And this year, I do think that overall, compare with all the class rankings and all the champions that these classes have received, mutant got the least amount of cool stuff. So Toad is the highest ranked mutant in 2022, because that's the last one that we have left here. And Toad is cool. Toad does suffer from exactly the same problem that Sauron does, where we have Nimrod, we have Omega Sentinel, we have Warlock that absolutely walk over these champions. Toad would be so much scarier on defense if these three champions didn't exist in the game, and like perhaps Ghost and a couple of others. Toad is a good defender. Again, he can function as an amazing defender for Battlegrounds, or again in Alliance War if you can protect him from these gnarly tech champions. It definitely is quite tricky champion to use as well, because he does have much more offensive potential than many people realize, especially against skill champions. Against skill champions, the fact that every time they purify poison, they might be inflicted with that passive poison, and that passive poison damage is just absurd. You see, this is exactly where I talked why Captain Britain was so low, because Toad does not focus around, shrug off abilities, but he does it better than Captain Britain does. Like, you can use Toad against Kingpin and you can kill that Kingpin way faster. You can use Toad against Anti-Venom or Agent Venom, or Mole Man, and you can kill all of those champions much faster with these passive poisons whenever they try to purify your actual poisons. And that is a fact that Toad does have quite a few party tricks, like the fact that he can pretty much bypass Nick Fury's second life if you time things well. His passive poison damage cannot be understated. He can throw a massive level 2 as well. If you get crits there, there's going to be a ton of damage. Access to a reliable long duration slow if need be. And all of it comes together very well. Ultimately, I do think, for instance, if Toad was, let's say, a science champion, without access to 500 million prowess effects, he would be much better as a champion, because he wouldn't have his greatest weakness, which is the mean robots coming for him. But since since he is a mutant in this game, and there is that kind of like big cloud hanging over him as a defender, I think this is a fair placement for him. He is a good champion. He can be an amazing defender, but you need to be very cautious and careful when you draft him, when you use him, where you place him in Alliance 1. And offensively, again, he does what most mutant champions do. He has access to regen, he has access to poison, and, he inflicts and he deals with shruggers as well. So there's quite a lot to like, and he's a very solid champion that has his place in the game without a doubt. Moving on to last 3 champions I'm going to talk in today's video. So this is the bottom 12, right, so far. And now 14th best champion in 2022 is, in my opinion, Gorr. Now, Gorr is one of those characters, again, that has been underestimated for quite a long time, but since he has become more available in the featured crystal, many more people have started using him more. And that is, again, one more reason why I'm saying most of these newer champions are definitely going to have their placements changed. For instance, because before I myself ranked up Gorr several months ago now, because I happened to get him early, I would have placed him lower. I thought of him less. I did rank him up for Alliance for defense, and he has fulfilled his job admirably. He's one of the better defenders, I think, based on the kill count, because he can easily catch people off guard, unless you have a great counter. I know that some smartass is going to come into comment section, oh, just use Longshot for him, oh, just use Hood. Yeah, of course, every champion has their counters, but Gorr is just one of those champions that punishes you very easily and very hard if you do make a mistake, even with a good counter. The coolest thing about Gorr is that, well, number one, he is getting a tune-up, and that has been confirmed. So that is great. So he's going to be arguably, maybe, potentially even higher summon. Number two, aside from being a good defender, he's extremely underrated attacker, because he does have his level 3, which does insane amount of damage. There are several mistakes I do think about made when designing him. I do wish that they kind of like did the whole god slaying stack of heresy thing better, because there are hardly any gods or elders. I think they should have included, you know, some A-team or heroes or Illuminati tag or dimensional beings in it, something like that, to give more purpose to his persistent charge mechanic. At the same time, Gorr's effectiveness and use offensively lies in 3 very simple things, all of whom can be very, very useful. Number one, access to a shit ton of debuffs, damage or time effects. That's really helpful, because that by definition makes him a good option for a ton of these nodes where you either need damage or time effect, or specifically shock, like Thunderstruck, or poison, like Acid Wash, so on and so forth. So he's going to be capable of dealing with all of that stuff extremely well. Then he has access to a crap ton of buffs, which obviously makes him suitable for buffed up or any other nodes that require you to have a specific amount of buffs active on you. The main piece of utility comes from him being at a high sig, where he can basically maintain 100% uptime or close to it with his Undermine buff, and that is going to be made easier after he gets buffed. And with Undermine, he effectively bypasses auto block completely. None of the, Omega Sentinels and Penny Parkers work against him, so he's a great counter for those fights as well. And the third bit is that he has a massive, massive damage on his level 3, big enough for him to be viable to use in battlegrounds, not as the fastest option, but still able to KO champions like Thing or any other bulky opponents with the drop of a massive level 2. Now again, there are better options for virtually everything that you want to do with Gorr offensively. He is not the best attacker, but the combination of his defensive capabilities, and Gorr is the type of champion that is nigh immortal unless opponent has a good enough counter. And to explain that aspect, it's quite simple. Basically, whenever you hit Gorr, he gains a regeneration buff, and that regeneration buff gets more and more potent the lower his health goes. So unless you can somehow deal with that regen or have an absolutely insane amount of damage, you can hit him infinitely and he just won't die. So you do have to have a counter for him on defense 100%. And again, offensively, he is better than many people realize, capable of doing, reasonably quick fights. So Gorr is definitely gaining popularity, therefore I am ranking him in spot number 14 of 2022 champions, potentially to go higher, especially after his tune-up. Spot number 13 at the moment is gonna be Spidey. Now, Spider-Man, again, is one of those champions that is brand new. His placement is likely going to change at some point when more people acquire him. He becomes more mainstream. At the moment, he is yet again enjoying those benefits as the new champions often do, because he is quite tricky to fight against. And, you do need to be comfortable with his animations and abilities in order to do it confidently to a point where he can be an absolute defensive powerhouse right now. Do I think he's going to be a defensive powerhouse 6 months down the line? No, absolutely not. He's likely going to have the same fate as, let's say, Hitmonkey has had, where as soon as you know exactly how Hitmonkey works and you can confidently work around it and evade the special attacks, all that you're left with is tiny health pool. And Spidey champions notoriously has some of the smallest health pools in the game, And this one in particular is pretty much the squishiest champion in the game, because he has negative physical resistance and bottom 10 smallest health pool in the game. That means if you know what you're doing, he's going to be killed extremely easily, extremely fast, extremely quickly. So I do not value him much as a defender long term. Where I do find value with him is an niche offensive powerhouse, because in matchups where opponents do gain a lot of buffs, he can ramp up extremely quickly. He can have crazy good damage output. At the top of that, he has very useful niche utilities, such as when opponent is going unblockable with buffs, he can basically be absolutely untouchable and immortal. Also, in any matchups where opponents have buffs and some sort of power gain, he is nigh unbeatable. He is going to be one of those champions that is absolutely broken in the right case scenario, and champions like that virtually always have some purpose, some value in the game. And even if he's mediocre or below average in a generic fight, that doesn't matter, as long as he's amazing and excellent at what he does in suitable matchups, and if those matchups come along frequently enough, he will have a ton of value in the game. The best examples here are champions like Archangel, for instance. Any bleed immune or poison immune champion in Archangel sucks, but when he works amazing, and we all value Archangel highly. And we have a ton of champions like that, where if they work and they go bonkers, we like them, we use them, we rank them, we value them. And Spidey is one of those champions. Therefore, he's at the moment in spot number 13. The main thing is to determine how bonkers and how busted and how often those scenarios will come for him, basically. And spot number 12, last one in today's video, we nearly made it there. Spot number 12 is Wiccan. Wiccan was extremely underrated when he got released, and I think he is increasing in his usage and popularity right now due to the Alliance War situation specifically, also the fact that he's more frequently available right now. Now, ultimately, I personally still believe that out of all three neutralized champions, okay, technically we have 4 neutralized champions. I bet you didn't even know that Purgatory has access to a 65% neutralize, and she's so shit that nobody counts her as a neutralized champion. So, back to 3 neutralized champions. Tigra, Rintrah, and Wiccan. Wiccan is the worst one, in my opinion. I do think Tigra is just too fast, too effective, too bonkers, and she's the best one. I think Rintrah is extremely well balanced, chunky, can have great damage, plenty of utility bits in his kit, amazing on defense. And then we have Wiccan. I do think Wiccan is a crap defender. To anyone who knows how to fight against Wiccan, only thing you have to do against this guy is basically do not parry him, and then you'll be fine. So that's one. And he has tiny health pool, so as soon as people figure out exactly how to beat him, he's a non-issue in most cases. So we're going to be left with him with, 99% time as an offensive champion. As an offensive champion, there are some things that he does better than Tigra or Rintrah would. At the same time, he's also harder to use, he's squishier, and in generic situations, he's slower than both of the other two, unless obviously you have plenty of buffs to feed on, and in that case, other two are getting more powerful too. So I do think overall he's slightly behind Rintrah and Tigra. At the same time, he does have plenty of unique things. One of the coolest things is that he can block everything that's unblockable from Cosmic Champions, which obviously is the main reason why he's popular for Alliance War right now. On top of it, the fact that he can bypass the shock immunity and that not being a problem, he can replace all of his shock effects with degeneration, enables him wider range that it otherwise would. And again, neutralize as an ability is extremely powerful. Then a full-on access to basically 100% uptime or close to 100% uptime of neutralize is extremely powerful. And most of the champions that absolutely don't suck but can access neutralize would be considered amazing. You could give Jubilee neutralize, and if she could keep it up for most of the fight, she'd be considered amazing. You guys see where I'm getting at? Neutralize is just that powerful of an ability. Now, I do wish he was tankier. I do wish he had slightly more damage in generic fights. But ultimately, he definitely has a place. He definitely has a purpose. He definitely has his own weaknesses. But likewise, he also has his strong side, cheese matchups. And he is useful. And he's good. And that's why he's at top in today's list. Now, in tomorrow's video, every single champion that we're going to be talking about, in my opinion, is already going to qualify as a great and amazing champion. I think Wiccan's good. I think it's quite awesome. But everything starting from spot 11 and up, in my opinion, is awesome, amazing. If you like that champion, rank it up, because they can do a ton of cool stuff. Wiccan's almost there. Just half a step behind, in my opinion. And that is it. I'm done. This took a while. I'm telling you guys. These videos typically do take a while. So here is a quick revisit of the list. We're going from spot number 22. Captain Britain, Shuri, Sam Wilson, Wong, Sauron, Attuma, Misty, Knight, Toad, Gorr, Spidey Supreme, and then Wiccan. That is it for now. I need 3 glasses of water because my mouth is dry. So, if you did enjoy the video, hit that like button, hit that sub button, hit all the good buttons. I am trying my best here, guys, and it'd be great if you showed some support for that. Thank you very much, and I'm gonna catch you guys later. See ya. Hello there, guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about the